Musa, Emeka, and Kola sat around a small table, counting piles of money while holding cigarettes in one hand. 2 bags of cash still waited to be counted, but Musa couldn't hide his excitement. Raising a handful of money, he grinned widely. "This is the easiest money I've ever made," he said happily. Emeka nodded, smiling as he added, "True, Musa. At this rate, I'll buy a house and a car by the end of the year. Business is looking very good for us." The group began discussing their next plan to catch another victim and make even more money. But Kola, the newest member, finally spoke up, his voice calm but serious. "Guys, we need to be careful. If we're not, we might end up as victims ourselves while looking for who to trap." Emeka's face darkened, and he stood up angrily, pointing a finger at Kola. "I've warned you many times, Kola. Stop bringing bad energy here. You're always talking about getting caught. I don't need that kind of fear in this group. If you're not interested, you can leave. This is a gang for real men, not weaklings." The gang's plan was cold and cruel, posing as a bus service to lure passengers, drive them to remote areas, and either demand ransom, sell them to ritualists, or find other ways to profit from their misery. Kola's warning hung in the air, but the others brushed it off, eager to continue their twisted scheme. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the bustling bus stop in Lagos. Tunde, a tall, lean 15-year-old boy with neatly cropped hair, stood next to his mother. Her face looked tired, and her steps were slower than usual, but she held onto his hand firmly. "Tunde, my son," she began, her voice soft yet filled with emotion, "remember what I always tell you. Study hard, pray always, and respect your teachers. God will protect you." She placed her hand gently on his head, offering a silent prayer for his safety. Tunde nodded, his face serious, though his heart felt heavy. "Yes, Mama. I'll do my best," he replied. But deep down, he felt uneasy about leaving her in her condition. His mother, Mrs. Adewale, had been unwell for weeks. Tunde's father was away on a work trip, so she had mustered all her strength to walk him to the bus stop. It was a short distance, but every step seemed like a struggle for her. "I wish I could follow you to school today," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "But I need to take my final injection at the hospital. I can't afford to miss it, my son." Tunde glanced at her, noticing the faint lines of pain etched on her face. "Mama, I understand. You don't need to worry about me. I'll be fine," he assured her, though he wished he could stay home to help. As they stood waiting, a small yellow commercial bus pulled up in front of them, its brakes screeching loudly. The driver, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard and a worn-out cap, leaned out of the window. "Where are you going?" he asked gruffly. "Fako," Mrs. Adewale replied, stepping closer to the bus. Tunde looked at the bus and immediately felt a sense of unease. It wasn't the bus itself, it was the way the driver avoided looking him in the eye, the dented side panels, and the faded, grimy seats. "Mama," Tunde whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "I don't like this bus. Can we wait for another one?" His mother sighed, glancing at her watch. "Tunde, we've already spent too much time at home. It's getting late, and you need to get to school before nightfall. This is not the time to be picky about buses." "But Mama." "No buts, Tunde," she interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "God will guide and protect you, my son. Just promise me you'll call your housemaster as soon as you arrive. I'll also check on you. Now, go." She smiled and ran her fingers through his hair. Tunde bit his lip, reluctant but unwilling to disobey her. He hugged her tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with the slight bitterness of medication. "I love you, Mama," he said. "I love you too, my dear," she replied, fighting back tears. The driver, impatient from the delay, honked loudly. "Madam, if you're not ready, let me move. I don't have all day." Tunde climbed into the bus, his heart still heavy. The driver muttered under his breath, "Mother and son wasting time. People like this are always delaying others." As the bus began to move, Tunde turned to look at his mother one last time. She stood there, waving and smiling, her figure growing smaller and smaller until she disappeared from sight. Tunde sat quietly at the back of the bus, gripping his school bag like a lifeline. He kept his eyes fixed on the passengers, his mind restless. Most of them seemed harmless, a frail elderly woman snoozing lightly, a man engrossed in a crumpled newspaper, and another staring out of the window, his face blank. Yet, two men on the bus stood out to Tunde. One was seated near the driver, while the other occupied a seat at the far back, just a few rows away from Tunde. They didn't exchange words, but their frequent glances at each other made Tunde's skin crawl. It was as if they had a secret, a dark, unspoken understanding that the rest of the passengers weren't privy to. Tunde's grip on his bag tightened as unease spread through him like a creeping shadow. The bus weaved through the chaotic streets of Lagos, its horn blaring every few seconds. It felt like an ordinary ride at first. Vendors darted between vehicles, hawking snacks and drinks. Pedestrians hurried along the crowded sidewalks. But then, the bus took a sudden turn. Tunde frowned. This road didn't seem familiar. Leaning forward, he called out, "Driver, is this the way to Fako?" The driver waved him off without even looking back. "Relax, my boy. The main road is blocked. This way is faster." Tunde's stomach churned. The driver's casual dismissal did little to calm him. He scanned the other passengers, searching for someone who might share his concern. But they were either too tired, indifferent, or distracted to notice. The elderly woman continued to doze. The man with the newspaper turned a page, unbothered. Taking a deep breath, Tunde tried to silence the alarm bells ringing in his head. Maybe it's just a shortcut, he thought. But as the scenery outside began to change, his unease deepened. The noisy streets of Lagos soon gave way to quieter roads. The bustling shops and noisy vendors were replaced by stretches of empty land. The farther they drove, the stranger the surroundings became. The houses became fewer, the streets narrower, and the people scarcer. When the bus veered onto a narrow, dusty path flanked by tall grasses and dense bushes, Tunde's unease turned to outright fear. He leaned forward again, his voice trembling. "Driver, are you sure this is the way to Fako? This doesn't look right." The driver glanced at him briefly in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "Relax, boy. Everyone takes this road when the main one is blocked." Tunde wasn't buying it. He peered out of the window, his heartbeat quickening. The road was eerily deserted. No cars, no motorbikes, not even a stray goat wandered the area. Just the bus, bouncing and rattling along the uneven path. The tall grass on either side swayed ominously in the breeze, casting strange shadows in the fading daylight. Something about the road felt wrong. It wasn't just quiet, it was oppressively silent. The kind of silence that made your ears strain for the slightest sound. Even the birds seemed to avoid this place. His instinct screamed at him to do something, but he hesitated. None of the other passengers seemed alarmed, and he didn't want to appear paranoid. Tunde turned to the man beside him, a burly fellow with a gruff look. "Excuse me, sir. Don't you think this road is strange? Shouldn't we say something?" The man glanced at him, then shrugged. "It's not my business, boy. The driver knows what he's doing." Frustrated, Tunde sat back, his mind racing. The two men he'd noticed earlier, the one near the driver and the one at the back, were still exchanging glances. Now, their looks seemed more deliberate, their body language tense. Tunde's chest tightened. What are they planning? The bus slowed, jolting him from his thoughts. They had turned sharply onto an overgrown trail barely wide enough for the vehicle. The bushes brushed against the sides of the bus, their thorny branches scraping against the windows like nails on a chalkboard. The path ahead was barely visible, swallowed by thick foliage and the shadows of tall trees that loomed overhead. "Driver, stop this bus now!" Tunde yelled, his voice breaking with fear. The driver didn't respond. Instead, he pressed harder on the accelerator, and the bus lunged forward, bumping and shaking as it navigated the uneven trail. Panic set in. Tunde stood up, his voice louder this time. "This isn't right. We need to turn back." "Sit down, boy," barked the man at the front, his tone sharp and commanding. It was the first time Tunde had heard him speak, and his voice sent chills down his spine. The man's piercing gaze was enough to silence him temporarily. But Tunde's fear was stronger than his intimidation. He turned to the other passengers. "Can't you see something is wrong? This isn't the road to Fako." The elderly woman stirred, blinking groggily. The man with the newspaper frowned but said nothing. Nobody seemed willing to back him up. The bus plunged deeper into the wilderness. The road grew rougher, the trees denser, their twisted branches forming eerie shapes in the dim light. Shadows danced across the windows, creating the illusion of figures moving just beyond the tree line. Tunde's mind raced. What do I do? Should I jump out? Scream louder? Fight the driver? Suddenly, the bus screeched to a halt. Everyone lurched forward. Tunde clutched his seat, his heart pounding. "What's going on?" Tunde murmured. Tunde's instincts screamed at him to move. Something terrible was about to happen. Tunde's fear escalated. His mind raced as he considered his options. The bus slowed slightly to navigate a bumpy patch of the trail. That was his chance. Clutching his bag, he bolted for the door, flinging it open and leaping out before anyone could stop him. "Stop that boy!" The old woman, who had seemed so weak and frail earlier, suddenly yelled with a voice full of unexpected strength and authority. Her sharp cry echoed inside the bus, making Tunde freeze for a split second. That was the moment he realized the chilling truth. He was the only one who didn't belong, the only one who wasn't part of whatever sinister plan was unfolding. Tunde hit the ground hard but scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his knees and elbows. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him, darting into the dense bush. Branches tore at his clothes and scratched his skin, but he didn't stop. His breath came in short, ragged gasps, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. Behind him, he heard the sound of pursuit, heavy footsteps and angry voices calling out. "Get him! Don't let him escape!" Tunde pushed himself harder, weaving through the thick undergrowth. His school bag felt like a lead weight on his back, but he refused to drop it. Every step felt like a battle against his aching muscles and the fear threatening to consume him. After what felt like an eternity, his strength gave out. He stumbled and collapsed behind a large tree, trying to catch his breath. The forest was eerily silent except for the faint rustling of leaves and his own labored breathing. Just as he thought he might have lost them, a rough hand grabbed him from behind. "You think you can escape from us?" a deep voice snarled. Tunde froze in terror. The man who had caught him was one of the passengers from the bus. His face was twisted with anger, his grip on Tunde's arm unrelenting. "You'll regret making us run after you," the man hissed, dragging Tunde to his feet. "Please, let me go," Tunde begged, his voice trembling. "I don't know anything. I just want to go to school." The man laughed coldly. "School? You're not going anywhere now." Tunde's mind raced, searching for a way out. He remembered the small penknife his mother had given him to sharpen his pencils. It was tucked away in the side pocket of his bag. Moving as carefully as he could, he reached for it, praying the man wouldn't notice. Before he could grab it, another man emerged from the bushes, the second man from the bus. "What are you doing? Tie him up before he tries anything stupid," he said, his voice harsh and commanding. Tunde's heart sank. He had to act fast, or he'd lose any chance of escape. Summoning every ounce of courage, he tightened his grip on the penknife in his bag and waited for the right moment. Tunde's heart sank like a stone in deep water. If he didn't act immediately, his chance of escape would slip away forever. He made a desperate move, but everything after that became a blur, a haze of panic and confusion. When Tunde finally opened his eyes, he found himself in a small, dimly lit room. The flickering light from a single bulb cast eerie shadows on the cracked walls. His hands and legs were tightly bound with coarse ropes that dug painfully into his skin. Every muscle in his body ached, as if he had been thrown around like a rag doll. His throat felt parched, and his stomach growled angrily, reminding him how long it had been since he last ate. He tried to piece together what had happened, but his head throbbed with a sharp, relentless pain, clouding his thoughts. He winced, his mind racing as fragments of the bus, the shouting, and his futile escape attempt flitted through his memory. "Where am I? How did I get here?" he asked, scanning through the room with his eyes. He tried to scream, but his mouth was gagged with a piece of cloth. Two men stood nearby, talking in low tones. When they noticed Tunde was awake, they turned toward him with cold, mocking smiles. "Ah, the little boy is awake," one of them said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "How was your nap, huh?" Tunde tried to mumble something, but the gag muffled his words. The other man walked over, crouched in front of him, and pulled the gag down roughly. "Please," Tunde whispered, his voice trembling. "Let me go. I just want to go home." The men laughed cruelly. "Go home," one of them mocked. "You're not going anywhere until your parents pay us." Tunde's stomach groaned loudly, and tears welled up in his eyes. "I'm hungry," he pleaded. One of the men stood up and went to a corner of the room, returning with a small, rusty bowl. He shoved it toward Tunde, spilling some of the contents on the floor. The smell hit Tunde immediately. Spoiled soup with pieces of unidentifiable meat floating in it. His stomach churned at the sight. "Eat," the man barked. Tunde hesitated, his trembling hands reaching for the bowl. But as soon as he brought it closer, the foul smell made him gag. "I can't eat this," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Suit yourself," the man said, kicking the bowl away. "No food for you then." Tunde cried silently, the weight of his situation sinking in. Meanwhile, at home, Tunde's mother anxiously glanced at the clock. It was already past 8 p.m., and she hadn't received any call from the school. She picked up her phone and dialed the housemaster's number. "Hello, sir," she said, her voice shaky. "Please, has Tunde arrived? He left home this afternoon, and I told him to let you know when he got there." The housemaster sounded concerned. "Madam, we haven't seen Tunde yet. Are you sure he left on time?" Tunde's mother froze. "What? He should have been there hours ago. It takes only 2 hours to get to the school." "No, madam," the housemaster repeated gently. "He's not here. I promise to call you immediately if he shows up." Tunde's mother dropped the phone, her hands trembling. When her husband returned home, she rushed to him, her voice frantic. "Tunde hasn't reached school. I called the housemaster, and he said they haven't seen him." Her husband's face darkened with worry. "We need to go to the police." At the station, they reported Tunde's disappearance. The officer on duty listened attentively, then promised to begin a search immediately. "Don't worry," he assured them. "We'll do everything we can to find your son." Back in the small room, Tunde sat in silence, his stomach cramping from hunger. The men returned and demanded, "What's your father's phone number?" Tunde hesitated, his heart pounding. "If I don't tell them, they might hurt me," he thought. Slowly, he recited the number, his voice shaking. One of the men dialed the number while the other stood over Tunde, a menacing glare in his eyes. The phone rang several times before Tunde's father picked up. "Hello." His father's voice was filled with concern. "Papa Tunde," the kidnapper began, his tone cold and deliberate. "We have your son. If you ever want to see him alive again, you'll bring us 5 million. No excuses, no delays." Tunde's father's heart sank. "Please, we don't have that kind of money," he begged. "We are just ordinary people. We'll give you what we can, but 5 million is too much." "5 million or nothing," the man growled. "If you don't get it, you'll never see your son again." He ended the call abruptly. Tunde's mother collapsed into her husband's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "We must save him. We must do something," she cried. Her husband held her tightly, his own fear barely concealed. "But where will we get that kind of money, woman? Even if we sell everything we own, it won't be enough." After a moment of silence, he said, "There's only one option. My father's land. It belongs to me and my siblings, but I don't care. I'll sell it. I'll find a buyer immediately." Those men sounded serious, and we can't risk losing our son. Tunde's mother nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "Do whatever it takes. I just want my son back." Tunde's father sat in his small living room, staring at the documents for the family land. The decision weighed heavily on him, but he was resolute. "Our son's life is more important than anything," he said firmly, breaking the silence. His wife sat beside him, her face streaked with tears. "But what about your siblings? Won't they object?" she asked hesitantly. "They can object all they want," he replied. "Let them be angry. I can't sit and do nothing while my only son is in danger." The dim, musty room where Tunde was held captive was silent except for the occasional sound of insects buzzing outside. Tunde sat on the dusty floor, his back resting against the cold wall. He shifted slightly, trying to ease the discomfort in his aching body, when he felt something hard in his back pocket. Curious, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his small, battered Bible. A faint smile spread across his face as he held it tightly. With this, he whispered to himself, "I know God is with me." Despite the gnawing hunger that made his stomach growl painfully, Tunde opened the Bible. The faint light that filtered through a crack in the wall fell on a verse that seemed to leap off the page. "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble." Tunde closed his eyes and clutched the Bible tightly to his chest. "God, please save me," he prayed softly. "I know you are watching. Please hear me and deliver me from these men." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his prayer. Tunde's heart raced as he quickly hid the Bible back in his pocket. The door creaked open, and a rough voice barked, "Quiet in there." The captor didn't stay long, but Tunde knew better than to take any chances. He waited until he was sure he was alone again before pulling the Bible back out. It gave him strength in the darkness, reminding him that he wasn't alone. Time passed slowly. Days blurred into nights, and Tunde's isolation grew heavier. On the 5th day, the kidnappers barged into the room, their faces tense. "Get up, boy," one of them snapped, yanking Tunde to his feet. Tunde stumbled, his legs weak from hunger and lack of use. They pushed him roughly, forcing him to walk through a narrow path in the dense forest. Branches scratched at his skin, and he stumbled often, but the men showed no mercy. Finally, they arrived at a small hut hidden deep in the woods. Inside, a man sat on a mat. He wore flowing red robes adorned with cowries and beads. His eyes were sharp and unsettling, as though they could see straight into Tunde's soul. "This is the boy," one of the kidnappers said, shoving Tunde forward. The man rose slowly, his cowries jingling. He approached Tunde and extended a hand to touch his head. But the moment his fingers made contact, he recoiled as if burned. "No," the man shouted, his voice filled with alarm. "Not this boy." The kidnappers exchanged confused glances. "What do you mean?" one of them asked. "We've been waiting for days. He's the one you asked for." The man stepped back, his eyes wide with fear. "This boy is different. He is marked by a power greater than mine. Take him away. If you harm him, calamity will fall upon all of us." "Are you serious?" another kidnapper asked, his frustration evident. "We've risked everything for this. You're telling us we've wasted our time." The man's voice turned cold and commanding. "Do not question me. Leave now, or you'll regret it." Reluctantly, the kidnappers grabbed Tunde and dragged him out of the hut. As they trudged back through the forest, one of the men spat angrily. "This is madness. First, we lose the money, and now we can't even use him. What kind of bad luck is this boy?" Another shrugged. "Let's just get rid of him before more trouble comes our way." Hours later, they shoved Tunde into a car. The vehicle sped through deserted roads until they reached a junction not far from his neighborhood. "Get out," one of them barked, shoving a small bundle of cash into Tunde's hand. "Take this and go. We don't ever want to see you again." Tunde stumbled out of the car, clutching the money tightly. He stood there, dazed, as the car sped off into the night. "Thank you, God," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You saved me." The streets were eerily quiet as Tunde made his way home. His legs trembled with exhaustion, but he pushed forward, driven by the thought of seeing his family again. At home, Tunde's parents were consumed with worry. His mother paced back and forth, her hands clasped tightly in prayer. "Adunni, you need to rest," Tunde's father said, though his own face was etched with stress. "I can't," she replied, her voice trembling. "What if something terrible has happened to him?" "I miss him so much," she said. "I miss my son." Holding Tunde pictures and sobbing. As they spoke, a soft knock echoed through the house. Both parents froze. Who could that be at this hour? Adunni whispered, her heart pounding. She rushed to the door and threw it open. Standing there, dirty, weak, and teary-eyed, was Tunde. Tunde, she screamed, wrapping her arms around him in a fierce embrace. Mama, Tunde sobbed, his voice muffled against her shoulder. I'm home. His father joined them, pulling Tunde into a hug. Thank you, Lord, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, Tunde said, his voice breaking. His mother held him tightly, her tears soaking his shirt. You're safe now. That's all that matters. As the family sat together, Tunde clutched his Bible, silently thanking God for bringing him back home. But in the back of his mind, he wondered about the man in the red robes and the words he had spoken. Why had he called him different?